thank you all for coming. So I was kind of expecting just like 4 people, so this is a bit different, so it's all good. I don't know, do you want a little history of myself or anything like that before we start? Some people are nodding. I know some people from outside who've turned up, which is a bit cheeky. So yeah, I'm Helen Cranstone, I'm an occupational therapist. I've been working in the field of autism probably for about 20 years now. Didn't really know much about autism at the start of my career, and as I've kind of gone through various different aspects of OT, I've worked with lots of different people really, and each time I've worked with different people I've always learned something new, and I think that's what I love about autism. That it's just like an emerging kind of thing that's happening, especially at the moment with the neurodiversity movement that's happening at the moment. That's really quite exciting. So at the moment, I'm working in a trauma kind of school, but we've got lots of children with autism in there as well. So there's always like elements of autism throughout all of my career so far. I was working here for a few years, and I was just talking to someone outside, and I've been connected to Prize Court for 6 years now, which I hadn't actually realised until today, and I was like, crikey, 6 years has gone by ever so quickly. And there's been a lot of change at Prize Court as well over those 6 years, but then looking at the timeline behind us, over 20 years, wow, look at where we all are. And looking at all the posters as well, I can see all the children up there, and just, I remember them when they were like this big, and now they're like this big. Some of them are taller than me. Well, most of them are actually, because I'm not that tall. So today we're going to be looking at the sensory systems. We're going to have a very brief overview of sensory processing, and some of you probably already know quite a bit about it, having worked here or people, with people with autism. We're going to look at a little bit of a case study type thing, and an activity. We're going to have discussions and questions. Whenever I give talks to people, I kind of want to keep them really kind of low key. Okay, so if you've got any questions, just ask. I quite easily go off topic. Anyone who knows me knows that I can go completely off topic. So yeah, just to let you know, really, I could just be sort of start talking about something else related to this. I don't start talking about my holidays. It's normally related to this, but it's such a big topic when we talk about autism, sensory processing. So, before I go on to the next slide, how many sensory systems do we think that we have? People could just shout out answers. 8. Someone, yeah, you're on it already. Can you name them? Anybody? Auditory, yeah. Yeah. You don't have to name all of them if you don't want to, but you can. Don't feel pressured to do all of them, but you can if you want.
Touch.
Yeah.
Vestibular. Proprioception.
Some other ones. Can anyone think of some other ones? Interoception, yes. We've worked together, haven't we? So, yeah. Interoception. Any more? I've lost count.
Vision.
Have
we said vestibular?
No, I don't know. I can't remember if we did. Did we say vestibular? Yeah, let's have that one too. Okay. So yeah, that's 8. So here we go. There's a lovely little slide here. Look. And as you can see, the not so deliberate mistake, I missed one out. So even OTs missed them out, So it's quite good that Clem pointed this out to me earlier, that I missed one out. So auditory, hearing, olfactory, smelling, tactile touch, gustatory taste. Vestibular is our balance. That's a really important one to keep your eye on when you're working with people who have sensory processing challenges. Proprioception is knowing where your body is in space. And interoception, now this one is something that OTs really, really love. And it's kind of a little bit new, but old at the same time. And considering I thought I only started working here like a year ago and I've been here 6 years, my kind of idea of time is all a bit skewed. So it's probably been around 5-6 years, which I think is is new, but it's not. So that's the feelings inside. So proprioception, knowing where your body is in space. If everyone closes their eyes, if they're happy to do this, we can do a little experiment. So you can kind of feel what proprioception is. Okay, so if you put your arms out to your side, don't hit the person next to you, or just, just go for it. Or do hit the person. It's up to you. If you don't like that person, no, that's fine. So with your eyes shut, Emma's, that's a good look, Emma, that's a good look. What I'd like you, you look like you're after a hug now, yeah. If you could place your right index finger onto your nose without looking, you might have to dodge round somebody, find your nose. Emma doesn't know her left from her right. That's all right. Neither do I. That's absolutely fine. Okay, and now can you place your arm back? And can you do the same on your other side then, please? Okay, cool. And you could put your arms back now. And you put your arms by your side. So that is proprioception. You know where your body is in space. You know how quickly your arm is moving in space. Nobody poked themselves in the eye really quickly or missed their face completely. So that is what that is. Interoception is the inside feeling. So it's understanding what is going on inside your body. And the reason it's really kind of interesting for OTs is that interoception is kind of like the key sensory system for regulation. And when we start looking more at sensory processing, it is about regulating yourself and keeping yourself calm, or getting yourself really happy, or being angry. So when we look at inside feelings, and we're looking at, for example, anger, can anyone think about what feelings are going on inside their bodies when they're angry? Can they describe that feeling? Heat, yeah. Where would you feel heat? Would that be?
Would be from the waist up.
Waist up, yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Anything else that anyone might feel when they're angry?
Quite tense.
Tense. Shoulders like that, yeah. Shaky, yeah. Yeah. Anyone else got any other feelings? Everyone might have different feelings of how they're angry, how they feel. I know for me, when I get really angry, I get like pins and needles in my hands. For some reason, I get like little pins and needles, and it feels like my hands don't really belong to my body, which is a bit weird. I can also feel my heart pumping really hard inside my body. And interestingly enough, with interoception, there's times where our body doesn't really kind of pay attention to our heart beating and our lungs expanding and deflating. I don't know, deflating. Because our bodies are really noisy. So part of the interoception process is that we can hear these noises all of the time, but our brain doesn't always click into what's going on. So vestibular is the balance. So again, you know that this is upright, this is to the side, this is to the other side. Taste, pretty self-explanatory. Tactile is explanatory. Olfactory, explanatory, but this is another interesting system, that this system goes straight to parts of our brain that detect danger. So, for example, if you smell a fire, your first instinct is quite like, there's a fire, let's run away. And we have that system that goes straight to our fight, flight, and freeze response to keep ourselves safe. So if we smell like horrible food, we'd be like, well, we're not eating that because that might make us ill. Any questions so far? Because I've realised we don't have much time, but please ask questions if you want, and I could... Everyone's like, yeah. Everyone's all right? Okay. Because I'm kind of whizzing through this because I want to get to the activity bit. So, this is what sensory processing is. It's the ability to register, discriminate, adapt, and respond appropriately, both physically and emotionally, to sensory input from our bodies and the environment. Anyone got any points or questions about that? everyone's quiet. So that is what it is in a nutshell. And it's really important to make this point now, that sensory processing is different to sensory integration therapy. Sensory integration therapy is something that trained occupational therapists and speech and language therapists and physiotherapists administer with children. And sensory processing is part of that theory, but it is not sensory integration therapy. And it's really important to not make that kind of, you make the link between the two, but they are two very different things.
Sorry, can I ask you?
Yes.
With the auditory,
Yeah.
if you have a young child that just doesn't hear accurately what you've said, as in doesn't process that, would that come under the sensory processing? So, for example, just almost has his own agenda for what he's hearing, literally his own agenda, and hears it differently, and doesn't know how to respond to auditory conversation in what you would think. So, you know, a child says, "I'm faster," and he can't no, I'm faster, no, but I'm faster, I'm faster.
Yeah.
And big meltdown, and just can't come to terms with that. Is that part of auditory processing?
It can be.
It can be,
Yeah. It can be part of auditory processing, and it can be part of having an autistic brain as well.
Yeah.
Kind of the two can marry together, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So that kind of brings me on quite well to this next slide, actually. So how it works, we have sensory receptors all over our bodies that receive the information from outside. So they're everywhere, and this diagram here, I don't know, can everyone see that with the lights on? I can turn the lights off if you like. It shows you that you have more receptors in your hands, in your face, in your tongue, in your mouth. So they're all over your body, but you have more sort of on your hands, on your face. So the bigger parts are where you have the most receptors, basically. And there is like a little fun experiment that you can do. I won't make you do it now. Emma's looking like, don't let me do anything else. You can do an experiment where you will put like a number of fingers on someone's back, and they need to tell you how many fingers you've got on their back. And quite often you get that wrong. But if you shut your eyes and you ask someone to place the fingers on your hand, you can tell how many fingers you've got on your skin, on your hand. And that's because you've got more receptors in different areas of your body. So the receptors take in all the information from outside, and this is happening all of the time without you even thinking about it. This information then goes through neurons up into your brain, and they go through different processes to get there, where they synapse with other neurons, there's lots of chemicals that go on, and it gets into your brain. Your brain then decides what it's going to do with that information. So, for example, we're all sitting here now. We all look reasonably comfortable. I'm making that assumption that everyone is reasonably comfortable. All that information is from our different sensory systems, auditory, hearing, vestibular, all of that. It's coming into our bodies, going into our brain. Our brain is then kind of filtering that information, and it's going through different parts of your brain in order to kind of check it. And it comes into the brain, and the brain's like, right, I've got some information, let's just check this. Have I felt this sense before? Yes. Was everything okay? Yes. So that's fine. We don't need to do anything. Another bit of information come into the brain, and it might be, right, okay, the fire alarm's just gone off now, so this bit of information's coming into the brain. The brain is like, hang on a minute, this is a bit scary. This has happened before and there's been a big fire. Let's do something. We need to go and do something. So the brain decides what we're going to do. It comes in, decides whether we can sit and ignore it and everything's fine, or we need to go and do something about that sensory input. Does that make sense so far? Yep, okay. So we just explained that bit there. The limbic system is a key part of the brain that's used in sensory processing. Again, this is an area that I particularly find fascinating. Does anybody know anything about the limbic system? No? Yes, yeah. Did you want to
Like your sort of danger response.
Yeah.
It tells you when you're in trouble and fires up all the different parts that help you prepare and deal with that danger.
Absolutely, yeah. So for me, when I'm thinking, well, the limbic system is like that fight, flight, freeze response, and that's where most of the sensory processing takes place, which is that your lower brain takes place there, and it goes into systems within that limbic system that are responsible for fight, flight, and freeze. So it's quite easy for your brain to think, or an autistic brain, or somebody with sensory processing challenges, because not all autistic people have sensory processing challenges. Most of them do. And you can have sensory processing challenges and not be autistic as well. But there's more people with autism who have it. So it can come into your brain, into your autistic brain, and I've recently found out that children with autism have a larger amygdala, which is like the real fight, flight, like full on, I'm really scared, I'm going to run away from a tiger system. And that is activated like super quickly with lots of sensors that come into their body. So that's when you can see some children who just have complete freeze and panics around different sensory information coming into their body. And interestingly enough, when they get to about 12, it shrinks. And I was like, and I've seen lots of children here, they come into prize court, and it is just like, oh my goodness, wow. They're just children who are like on fight, flight all the time and can't relax. But then by about 12, they tend to calm down a bit, which I'm just like, this is like something I've learned quite quickly. But the limbic system is really key because it comes into there, happens in the lower brain, and then the information goes from the lower brain up to the frontal cortex, which then the brain decides, everything's okay, let's just chill. We don't need to do anything. Does that make sense? Because it is quite a complex system. And it takes a good 4 years at postgraduate level to learn about it. So it's kind of quite tricky to explain it in not that long. Any questions so far? No? Okay. So that's the system. That's how it works. It goes into your brain decides what to do, and then you have either an emotional response or a physical response.
Sorry.
No, please keep asking questions. I hate just keep talking.
The limbic system.
Yeah.
If you have a young person that's response is always flight,
Yep.
flight, but then seems to have something that's a much more traumatic experience,
Yep.
and you see for the first time freeze.
Yep.
Is that common, that something that's much bigger
Yeah.
is a completely different response that you've never seen before?
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. Because the way we experience processes, whether it's a sensory process or whether it's something outside or an emotional response, you're quite right. If something's really big and your body just goes into freeze, so it's the same response, but it's kind of on like another level. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then the brain remembers that as well. So if it happens again, the brain can kind of remember that was really scary. So I'm always going to be scared of that now. Does that make sort of sense? Because you hold on to those memories, again, in your parts of your limbic system, where the sensory system goes in and checks all those memories. So it can go, actually, I heard a loud bang, and that made me so scared, I froze and fell to the floor. And that made me feel even worse. Your brain will remember that. And if that happens again and again and again, and we're not there to change that, for them to change the outcome of that, your brain will always remember that and you'll always go straight into that response. I read a book called The Body Keeps the Score, and it talks about that traumatic events stay inside your body and you have those physical feelings all the time.
And what age would that start at, those traumatic,
I think I haven't actually found a definitive answer. I have worked with children who are like 4, 5. I think the longer you're on the planet, the more kind of exposure you've got to things. I think it can. And again, if we're talking about trauma and being autistic and living in a world which is not set up for autistic people, you're going to have lots of traumatic events, aren't you? It's called The Body Keeps the Score. And I've got some other books I can share with you as well. So, when there's sensory processing challenges, what happens is this information goes into your brain processes them, and there's kind of like a little jam that goes on. And it could be that you've got a really traumatic experience that's happened a lot, and you have that kind of trauma response straight away. It could be that you're like, I absolutely love this, and I'm going to do it more and more and more and more and more. So you can see unexpected and unusual motor and emotional responses. So it's not something that you would expect. So I'm sure we've all worked with children here, or adults, where you're like, well, actually, that's not what I would do. I'm trying to think of one now. I mean, you could probably think of something where you just have a little thinking like, actually, I wasn't expecting that. It could be like walking into a room with a different coloured light and someone just runs away and you're just like, well, what is that about? You know, this is fine, everything's fine, I'm calm, why are you not calm? And that could be what a sensory challenge looks like. And again, anyone can have a sensory processing challenge, but it is more prevalent in the autistic population, which I mentioned earlier. Again, I go off topic, I just start wittering and we get to this point where I've already talked about it. And it's quite important to realise that a sensory processing disorder is not a diagnosis. I see that a lot on some EHCPs, actually, where it says sensory processing disorder. Well, actually, we can't diagnose that. There isn't enough evidence, and it's not a diagnosis. It's a group of kind of things and differences. I much prefer to say sensory challenges and sensory differences. And it kind of raises a question as well for me. Should we really be trying to change them all? Or should we be trying to help individuals learn how to live with these challenges? I don't know. Anyone's views on that? Some people are nodding. What do you reckon? It's an interesting topic because the sensory integration theory is that we need to change those sensory differences. But the Royal College of Occupational Therapists, they issued a statement, it was back in 2021, to kind of say that maybe we shouldn't be trying to change everything. Maybe we should be accepting people for who they are. And if what you're seeing is affecting function, then we can support them. But actually, if it's not, then that's part of who they are.
As I've noticed in a few of the definitions is the word appropriately, which implies that somebody has decided what's
Exactly. And I read another book, which is really interesting, which I recommend everyone reads, and it's called The Connected Therapist. And she describes sensory challenges and the behaviours that you see with them as, would you be happy to go on a second date with that person after seeing that or experiencing what's happened? If it's a yes, then do we need to change it and help them with that? Possibly not. But it's different. Everyone's idea of what is appropriate is very, very different. So it just raises a big question for me as an OT who's constantly asked, can you fix my child because they have a sensory processing disorder? Well, first off, that's not a diagnosis. Secondly, is it interrupting with their function? Maybe not. Thirdly, should we be changing somebody's actual neurological differences? I'm not sure.
It's 50-50.
It's 50-50,
If that
yeah.
response to a situation causes them intense discomfort and pain, and it can be avoided, then we should probably avoid that experience so that we don't cause them pain. But if it causes them real distress, but it's inevitably they're going to come across it every day of their life, and I suppose in that case you do need to change it so that they can find a way to manage that. I think it's completely individual and on every individual situation.
Absolutely, yeah.
There's a lot of it come to mental capacity as well, because if you've got the capacity to realise that you can't abide the colour purple and you're not going to be around it, you're going to avoid it, then that's your choice, that's fine. If you lack mental capacity, then it gets you into the whole best interests field, which is going to be very difficult to set blanket rules. Because it's on an individual basis at a specific point in time.
Exactly, and you're quite right. And the responses that you get from the sensory input coming in changes as well day to day. So if you're generally more relaxed, you're less likely to see the sensory responses to some of the inputs. If you're already really heightened, you're going to see a lot more. So again, that comes back to the sensory integration theory and the integration kind of therapy. Should we be subjecting children to all of those sensory inputs in a therapy session, like, for example, if we're doing a desensitization program to teeth brushing, should we be really putting a toothbrush in their mouth and going through all of that again? Or should we be creating a more calm space for them to feel more calm and empowered and in control in order to do it themselves? It's a discussion that OTs can have for years. So it's really interesting how we support these children. And you're quite right in saying that the children here can't always tell us either what they want and what they don't want. So we kind of have to do a bit of guessing and look at their behaviours and see what works, see what doesn't work, and get to know them as well. And that's the key thing, is we need to know the children that we are supporting. We need to really understand them and have their best interests at heart. Because quite rightly, if you're with a child who just will run across the road, obviously,
Got one like that.
have you? You've got one that runs across the road, we can't just go, well, that's okay.
Oncoming traffic.
Oh, my
If I don't let any
days.
drops to the floor, I've got one like that.
Yeah. It's so challenging, isn't it? It's hard.
Undiagnosed as well.
Undiagnosed. What, with autism or sensory or
Anything.
everything? Oh goodness, sounds like you're having a bit of a.
Yeah. Frankie's here though, so he's great.
Is he?
Yeah. Struggling with his brothers having a tough time.
Oh, yeah. Have you? I mean, is Frankie older? Or?
Frankie's nearly 15. Yeah.
Yeah. So has he kind of like calmed a bit, or?
They're completely different.
Isn't that interesting?
Completely different.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that's similar is that they're different.
Yeah.
Just in every way.
Isn't it fascinating? Like, I've got 3 children. I don't have autistic children, but there's dyslexia that runs through my family, myself included. And I've got one daughter who's really dyslexic and very different, and I've got another daughter who's a little bit dyslexic, and they all act so differently. And it's just like, you treat them all the same, but I find it fascinating that when these little beings are born, that, like, all the different things that go on in their heads without us really knowing.
How the condition can affect 2 siblings so differently.
Yeah.
It's just extraordinary.
And that's just a lovely example that we can't just have this blanket.
Like this, and the other one's like this.
Oh, so you've got one like, stop it, stop talking. We've got that in our house as well. My eldest daughter is a talker, and my middle child is like, please just stop. Dinner table is like a bit stressful. Any questions so far? No, everyone looks happy. Okay, so we talk about like the behaviours that you can see that are attached to these sensory processing challenges. What sort of behaviours do you think you can see? I mean, you have highlighted some of them. Is there anything else that you might see that you think, oh, actually, this might be... Putting your hands over your ears, that kind of behaviour. Avoiding headbutting, you might see, yeah.
Dropping to the floor, spinning, jumping, eating their clothes.
Yeah.
Eating unedible things like worm casts, stuff like that.
I'm always curious, like, what is that about?
Worm casts.
What is it about worm casts and moths? Yeah. I've heard children who've eaten moths, like...
Climbing.
I feel like I want to try a moth right now. Anyway, sorry, yeah, climbing. Climbing is a big one, isn't it? Yeah.
And hanging off of things with one hand.
Yeah.
20 foot high.
20 foot high. Wow. Absolutely right. Yeah. So it can kind of look different in every person because everyone is different. Depends on what system is being affected, how the person is feeling at the time. And there's three main categories that we look at when we're looking at sensory processing. So we have a modulation, which is the over or under responsive child. So that's the children who you see in a noisy environment. They put their hands over their ears because they just cannot take any more of the noise. Having a modulation characteristic to sensory processing can also be that you have a child who is really noisy and likes a lot of noise and likes to go into noisy places as much as they can. So the under and over responsive is like a little cup in your brain, really. So when your cup is really full, and it gets full very, very quickly, that means you can be over responsive to information coming in. And if your cup is always empty with like a hole in the bottom of it, you can be under responsive and seek that input all of the time. So you can avoid it or you can seek it. And there's quite a lot of children here that seek a lot of movement and climbing and running around and spinning and jumping and all of that stuff. And I see a lot of children at the moment in mainstream school as well, where teachers say to me, Helen, this child will just not sit down. And my first question is, well, why are we expecting children to sit down for 2 hours a day anyway? Because I certainly don't want to do that. And I think the education system needs to sort themselves out, really. But also, they're children who are quite under-responsive, constantly rocking on their chairs, because they need to make themselves feel just right. So that's what they're doing. They're rocking in order to be calm and focus. So a child who's fidgeting isn't always a child who is not paying attention. They're actually doing their best to pay attention. I'm more worried about the children who sit still and don't move.
Can a child be both?
Absolutely, yes. They can be both. And it can depend on what environment they're in, and it can depend on what emotional state they are in at the time. Absolutely. Again, it's just a minefield. You have to work with what you see at the time. So the sensory diets that are kind of prescribed, whatever you call it, again, not one size doesn't fit all. You have to have like a toolbox of things that you can try and do in that situation at that time. So the motor part of it, you can have children who will be very rigid and don't like moving. You can have children that can't walk upstairs. You can have children who can't crawl. That's a whole other story about different stages of development. And the discrimination is giving meaning to that sensory input. So your child who sometimes can't recognise their name, that could be that they can't discriminate what's happening and what that sound means. Yeah. That makes sense? Yeah. So they could hear a loud bang, but they wouldn't actually necessarily know, oh, come here.
Both of them. Anything you said that doesn't apply, anything. Yeah.
So that's what it can look like. So these are the behaviours which we talked about before I got to this slide. So we can have children that avoid eating certain foods. I think there's quite a common like wet and dry thing that goes on. Some children prefer wet food, some people prefer dry food. And again, like we said, it's not just the autistic population that have all of these food differences. I know of quite a few children who aren't autistic who don't like having foods mixed together. I mean, it's just how it is. Avoiding touching certain textures or wanting to touch everything. Again, dressing can be a real issue. Some children hate putting their socks on, would rather be naked. I mean, hey, I can see the benefits there. Some children don't want to run, so that's the movement bit. They're too scared to run, basically, because they don't know where their bodies are in space. And they might not know the difference between walking and running. That walking at speed might be quite scary for them because they have those proprioceptive and vestibular challenges. They might run away. They might want to spin all of the time. They might become angry and scared very quickly, sort of like 0 to 100 in seconds. So you can see a complete change really, really quickly. And I learned that quite quickly working here, actually, because the children that we have here have really significant needs other than autism as well. So it can be quite complex. Avoiding school. At the moment, I'm working with probably about 7 or 8 teenagers who are not going to school at the moment. And again, that raises my argument of how schools cater for children who are neurologically diverse. School can be a really, really challenging place. When you think of the bells ringing, the peer relationships you've got that's going on, the seats that you have to sit on, you have to sit still, the changing classrooms, the light, everything, just is quite traumatising. They can have a lack of interest in anything. You can have a child that will just sit there and not want to do anything because anything they touch or move or hear can just cause them to become really distressed. Said hands over the ears, hurt himself or the others. The list is endless. As an OT, when I look at behaviours, I always think of sensory. It's part of what can be going on, but it's not always the sole cause of what's going on. We need to have a holistic approach to helping children with autism who probably have got a sensory processing challenge, but maybe not. And here at Prize Court, it's really good because we have a group of professionals that will work together to look at how children are managing in their environments. Any more questions?